Hi, Wade Lightheart. Welcome to the Genetic Genius Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
I'm excited to be here. So thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Before we dive deep into our conversation about digestive health, one of my total favorite topics, I'd love for you to just, tell a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your story, just so our listeners can get to know you.
Sure. Grew up in Canada and lived a very normal life, whatever that is, like, played hockey and rode bicycles and captured the flag after school and things like that. And then when I was 15, three things happened in my life that changed the course of my life. There's always these impactful things that you really unpack later and realize that was a changing point. One, my parents moved to a very rural place. It was 5 miles to my nearest neighbor up a dirt road where the telephone poles ended at my driveway. And the ironic part about that is it was a beautiful resort that my parents were caretakers of. So they worked for a wealthy individual. And most people say, wow, this is a great place to live. But I certainly didn't want to be there when I was 15. The second thing that happened is my sister was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, which was cancer of the lymph nodes, before she died after 4 years of the allopathic care model at the age of 22. And so early in my life, I recognized that, hey, your health isn't guaranteed and your life isn't a guarantee. And that's very impactful when you're a teenager because you usually don't think in those terms. The third thing that happened is my sister gave me a bodybuilding magazine that had Troy Zuclato on the cover, Mr. California at the time, two pretty girls in bikinis. And I thought, wow, maybe if I got those muscles, I could attract girls like that. So I took it upon myself to build a gym in my barn and start training. Kind of like, with sawhorses and makeshift pulleys and a very inexpensive York dumbbell and barbell set with the cement weights. And I would go out there and train in the freezing cold and the heat of the summer and everything you could imagine, because I discovered Arnold Schwarzenegger at that time, who was the biggest bodybuilding sensation in the world, as well as a movie star, and he was married to the Kennedys, and he lived this life in Venice Beach. And he said in his book, Education of a Bodybuilder, he said, you can achieve anything you want in life if you have hard work, self-discipline, and a positive attitude. And everybody I knew worked really hard. Like, this was a manual labor place. People worked in the forestry, they worked in fishing, they worked in construction, they worked in heavy equipment, they worked in landscaping, and everybody was beat up by middle age. They were just
ready to take a total vacation from life.
yeah. And I was like, well, everybody works hard, but this whole positive attitude and self-discipline, that this is an interesting idea. And of course, Arnold was essentially living the life that everybody would seem to be wanting to live. So I followed that, went to university, studied exercise physiology, and after school started mentoring under different individuals and worked in every single facet of the health and wellness industry, from representative as a supplement person, as in a store, in a retail environment, managed a gym, opened my own juice bar, even worked in the back of a warehouse shipping stuff, as well as a personal trainer, until in 2003. So about 16 years from when I started in that little barn, I got to represent my country at the Mr. Universe World Championships in
Wow.
Mumbai, India, and which afterwards I had a digestive disaster, a total health crisis, where I gained 42 pounds of fat and water in 11 weeks. So I went from Mr.
Oh my
Universe
gosh.
to Mr. Marshmallow.
Mr.
And
Marshmallow.
that crisis led me to a fellow by the name of Dr. Michael O'Brien, who was everything you would hope to be as a senior citizen. He was vibrant, he was healthy, he was so knowledgeable, and he gave these lectures for all day long. And he didn't eat even during it. He was just a picture of health and robust wellness. And I went to him and I said, I've got the best coach in the world. I've got Spartan discipline. I'm doing everything you're supposed to do. I've reached the cosmetic ideal of fitness, and I've had this total health crisis. What's the issue? And he said, wait, you've learned to build the body from the outside in. I'm going to teach you to build a body from the inside out. And he put me on digestive aids, enzymes, and probiotics, and started teaching me about digestion, absorption, utilization, the removing of waste out of the body. And in 6 months, I recaptured my physique, but I had a new level of health, vitality, and wellness. And during that time, Matt and I started a little business to serve originally bodybuilders that then expanded into a health clinic, which I ran in Vancouver. and then to the world at large, which is now known as Bioptimizer, which is a company that focuses on biological optimization, which means how do we enhance every single facet of the biology so that we can not just live long, but live strong during whatever years that we've been allotted.
I love that, Wade. What a great story to, the root of where your everything comes from. We all have that, like you said, but yours is just, you could see kind of like the pathway that opened up before you. And I really liked what that last thing that you said too about your company, because it's so key when we actually turn on the cells and we give them what they need and we help them have the keys to this like optimization, the best that they can be. And that's, I think now people are slowly starting to learn like, oh, I can do this and I'll actually feel better because it helps my cells to run better, and I think that's like the key for the future of our health, the future of wellness. And I love that that's what you're doing. And that's kind of like where your passion's lying now. Great. Well, thank you. So let's talk about digestion today. But let's start at the basics, because I think a lot of people, they think of like, well, my stomach, that's that's the only part of my digestion. So, where does it start, or what happens? What kind of like some of the stages that it goes through, from the mouth to the butt?
Yeah, well, there's a variety of different stages. I've summed it up into 5 distinct areas, I think, for comprehensive reasons. You could slice this down a million different ways if you want to get into the biochemistry stuff, but we won't do that for our listeners. We'll give them the effective understanding. So the first aspect of digestion starts with the senses: the taste, the touch, the smell, the texture, the feeling, the sensationary component that you are engaging, which and oftentimes creates a Pavlovian response, which is actually setting up our digestion. So if I say dill pickles and sauerkraut, oftentimes people will salivate a little bit. And why is that?
Right.
Because there's conditioning around that. If you think of your favorite food or your non-favorite food, there oftentimes is a physiological reaction to those things. And so we do know that our body will be activated to prepare for food. And that's why fine dining restaurants will dim the lighting, don't have any distractions and TVs, makes things so you get into a rest, relaxed state, which is the ultimate state to digest in. Once you take the food in, you chew it, masticate it, whatever you want to call it, the food gets broken up by your chewing it, and it goes down the esophagus into the upper cardiac portion of the stomach. Your stomach really goes into 2 compartments. The upper cardiac portion is where the food will remain for the first 30 to 60 minutes before hydrochloric acid is going to come in and start, which has 2 functions. Hydrochloric acid, first and foremost, disinfects your food from viruses, parasites, bacteria, any insects, any pathogens that could disrupt your health. And the second thing that it does, which is not known by that many people, is that it changes the pH of that food chyme. And as that pH changes, some enzymes will become activated and some will become deactivated. Now, there's a couple of assumptions there that there was enzymes in your food. For the most part, in the modern diet, we don't have enzymes in our food, unlike every other species which eats its food in an enzymatically rich live state. We cook our food, which has certain advantages. But because we cook it, we destroy the enzymes. And that means our body has to manufacture enzymes. And that has a huge metabolic cost. Enzymes are what is responsible for everything from thinking to blinking. There's over 25,000 different enzymatic reactions inside the body. There was a fellow named Dr. Edward Howell that said he had an enzyme bank account that was finite and he had to replenish it, or this led to disease and degeneration. So after the food is broken up with the hydrochloric acid and the enzymes, then it leaves the body or the stomach and into the intestinal tract. Now there's a thing called bicarbonate buffers that buffer the acids, which is a fancy name for alkaline minerals,
Right.
that don't burn holes in your intestinal tract, because your stomach can handle very, very high acids. Intestinal tract can't.
No, not
And
good.
no, and that's where people get into duodenal ulcers and things like
Right.
that. Interesting enough, if you don't have enough hydrochloric acid in your body, which tends to happen as we age, usually after the age of 35, what happens is twofold. Number one, you stop digesting your food very well. And number two, you may become more receptive for pathogens, which I described before. Also, ironically, if you don't have enough acid in your body, you'll often get things like acid reflux and heartburn because the
Right.
little sphincter on top of the esophagus will stay open because of the fermentation happening in the stomach. The gas pops it up, and then you start
Yep.
splashing up some of the acid that you do have in there and creates burning or heartburn or these sensations. And then they prescribe you an antidote. That's a whole other issue.
Right. That's not a good road to go down when you get on
No,
PPIs. No.
no. So stage 4 of the digestive process is where the food enters in the intestinal tract, and you have what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly. 10% good, 10% bad, and 80% opportunists of the different types of bacteria. Now, we live in a symbiotic relationship with these
Mhm.
bacteria, and without them, we'd all be dead. But we've been kind of sold a story that all bacteria are bad, but some bacteria are essential for the function and manufacturing, the final conversion stage of our food into either building blocks or energy units, or
Mhm.
things like neurotransmitters, like 95% of your serotonin is made in your intestinal tract. I mean,
Yep. Mhm.
and so maybe the reason people are not feeling as happy or as connected as they like has a lot more to do with a bacteria imbalance than it does the lack of some XYZ pharmaceutical.
Right.
And then the final stage is the removal, which all through this food moves through what's called peristaltic contraction, which is the contraction of smooth muscle tissue in the body that moves the food along and eventually leads to elimination. And that is directly connected to the type of food that you eat that's relative to your body, the transit time of that food, the
Mhm.
bacteria present in the food, how well it was digested, and do you have the electrical transmissions flowing through your spine properly to make that move and to get to elimination, which today, when people sit a lot, oftentimes that's compromised through compression of the spine.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
so and then sometimes through the other physiological condition that can cause problems is hiatal hernias can also contribute to things like acid reflux, heartburn. And
Yep.
so the two elements, most of those elements are chemical in nature, I would say. And
Mhm.
then there are those two incidences, which are physiological components, assuming that everybody has all their organs intact.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Some people are having some of those removed more common than we used to. Like
Correct.
it's
It happens
very
like all sorts of things.
Yeah. So, oh, that's great. I love that explanation because that really gives us a really good picture of, what's happening. So, if somebody's looking to heal the digestive system, do they have to work through one stage at a time? Or can it be like, if I'm taking this particular thing, like you mentioned probiotics and enzymes, if I'm taking this particular supplement, will all those stages then be affected and can have, or do you have to address one stage at a time, so to speak? I mean, maybe not the first stage, but
Well,
yes. Mastication is important.
yeah, well, I think I think we, you always want to simplify things, but not oversimplify them. And there's a fine art of that. And so we have to, let's just look at the statistics. 13% of the emergency hospital visits right now in the United States are related to gastrointestinal issues.
Mhm.
The second thing that we have to look at is that over 100 million people in this country, that's a third of the population, are suffering from some form of digestive distress on any
Wow.
day. And 25% of those are on permanent prescription medications.
That's right.
Okay, so the first stage of digestion, I would say, is getting an expert, not your medical doctor, because they're an expert in providing you pharmaceuticals
Mhm.
treat the symptoms of those
Exactly.
conditions. Go get a naturopathic doctor. Go get someone that understands. And let's look at your genetics, and
Mhm.
let's look at your epigenetic. What types of foods are natural and good for you? What
Exactly.
nutritional deficiencies might you have? What does your GI map look like? Do you have the bacteria that you need to
Mhm.
break down the food? Well, now we're looking, do we have the actual horsepower in the digestive system to alter it? Because the chances are, if you've got digestive issues and you're going to see a practitioner, you probably have had these for sometimes decades, and
Oh,
you think
yeah.
that that's normal.
Right.
It's normal based on what you're eating and what your body has available for resources to break down that food.
Mhm.
So without expert advice in those things, you can spend a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of frustration. You probably get these people all the time. I've tried everything. Well,
Right.
first and foremost, you haven't tried everything, because I mean, I didn't eat, you know, cans of worms. Okay, well, I'm not saying that you should, but I'm just saying,
Right.
so let's qualify that first.
Yeah.
You haven't tried anything. You need to try the next thing. But I do believe in addressing a systematic approach. I can
Yeah.
give you Band-Aid solutions. Yeah, if you got heartburn, acid reflux, try
Right.
HCl. If you're sitting with a lot of bloating or you have a lot of skin conditions, probably a good enzymatic formulation. If you catch every single flu that goes by and you can't seem to keep your concentration very well, or you do have bad bowel movements, probably a good probiotic was going to be great. But
Yeah.
those are Band-Aid type
Right.
ideas that
Exactly.
you can't supplement your way out of a bad lifestyle. And so you can supplement to bolster some deficiencies, but you have to address the whole picture to get to your ultimate level. And I think it's well worth the effort.
Perfect. I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, you got to, really address the root cause. And like you said, it's just a band-aid. And if you suppress those symptoms, then those symptoms will usually like blow up in a much bigger way. And, what you said too, that was so important is, Google is not your doctor, and that's usually what I'll see people that have been searching on the web for answers, and the web is not educated in the research that comes through, all the training and the knowledge behind seeing an expert, like we said.
Can I speak to that for a
Yes.
moment? So we have been online as marketers since 2004. And during that time, we have watched how the algorithms are developed, which is the mathematical formulations to show what goes from the top 10, 23, all those, when you say we've got 152,000 searches or this or whatever.
Right.
Well, you have to realize what's popular goes to the front of the list, and what's paid for goes to the front of the list, because what's paid for can be popular. And the truth is generally unpopular. So oftentimes, if you're looking to the most popular solution, you are actually just in a bought and paid for algorithmic prison that is leading you somewhere to purchase something from someone. Now, I'm not against the free market. I'm a big supporter of it. I think it'll solve a lot of problems. But if you don't understand how Google works, you have to recognize that just because it's on Google doesn't mean it's the truth. And oftentimes it's much less than.
Right. That's so true. And that's same with a research study. A patient sometimes will bring to me a study. I'm like, hey, let's dive deeper into the study. Who sponsored the study? What's it, was it a double blind placebo study? Like, what kind of study was it? You have to like really look into the depths of it. And there's a lot of stuff that's not studied that is much more valuable and applicable to a problem.
Well, this is where your professional practitioner comes into place, because first and foremost, we're talking the difference between clinical experience and double-blind research. Double-blind research is bought and paid for by institutions, governments, and companies who are looking to produce a desired result, whether that's get more funding, whether that's to prove the efficacy of a product, whether it is to offset regulatory components that allows them to make it a health claim, or to distribute this widely amongst a group of intelligent people. Says, well, this study says this, and we'll throw them at the bottom of our sales letter, and that's what's going on. Clinical practice is people who are applying practical applications that may be inferred from legitimate research, but will primarily come from their experience in the real world with real people with real problems. And I'm a big advocate of the N of one. And that is, what works for Mary, not necessarily going to work for Sue, because they have a completely genetic and epigenetic difference.
So true.
They have a different lifestyle. They have different needs. They have all these different components that need to be baked into the cake. And so that's where the primary person who's providing them insight to look at their lifestyle and the things they can do, the things they can't do, and make alterations right there in real time, because that is what's going to make the difference in a person's journey towards better health.
Yeah, so true. I love that. And what do you think about like why digestive disorders are so on the rise? There's a lot of different chronic diseases that I'm seeing more peaking, but why do you think that digestive, is it more because, poor nutrition, which the standard American diet, of course, is not a good diet? Or do you think it's more of an environmental toxicity where we're seeing, so like you mentioned epigenetics, we're seeing so many different things coming at us, which are then changing the way, and I think you mentioned earlier too, the gut brain connection, they're changing our, especially over the past 16 months with COVID, this higher stress environment, which then changes the way that our body processes. And what are your thoughts around that?
There's a great scene in one of my favorite movies called The Matrix,
Oh, I love that
where they're trying to determine why everything tastes like chicken.
movie.
And he was saying, well, how do we know what tastes like? Wait, and he's like, talks about tasty weight. Why does everything taste like chicken? That doesn't, like, maybe they didn't know how to make that flavor because we don't actually know what we're eating. Well, there's actually more truth to that statement than we might think, because after World War II, we moved from an agricultural society where almost everybody had some sort of livestock food, local production of food, into cities.
Mm,
And there was a population explosion. And the fears within the government was that we needed to create standardization of our agricultural business in order to meet the growing need of people living in cities and not in farms. And so that's what happened. And they put in agricultural bards and went to monoculturing, staple farming, and regulatory and subsidies and all this sort of stuff. And so farmers start planting these large monoculture crops, which didn't go from crop rotation. And they couldn't meet the yield. So they took the leftover bombs from nitrogen and put that into the soil. That increased the yield, but decreased the nutrient content.
right.
The plants got weaker and
Mhm.
didn't have as much protein in them and didn't have the same normal antibiotics or probiotics to
Right.
repel. And
Prebiotics.
so then they developed a variety of chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides to fight off the pests. And then when that didn't work, they started to genetically modify the plants so that the
Right.
pests couldn't affect them. And then,
Change after change.
and because we were shipping this all over the world, we needed to develop new ways of preserving the food and to change the coloring to its attractiveness. So we added
Hmm.
preservatives and dyes to the food. So now today, 80 years from that time, what we determine is food isn't actually food. A case in point, if you took a peach in 1955 versus a peach today grown in the same area, you would need 55 peaches today to create the equivalent of nutrition that peach had that long ago.
Wow.
And so anyone who's been to, say, Mennonite farm
Hmm.
and has had the heirloom seed of the various vegetables that you might find in your diet today, and you have one of those tomatoes or cucumbers or whatever it happens to be, you're absolutely shocked and blown away by the taste of it, because it tastes completely different than what you buy
Right.
even at the best organic superstores. And so you're like, well, wait a minute here, what's going on? But if you've never been exposed to grass-fed animals, if you've never been exposed to real, legitimate, organically biodiverse, biodynamic food production, you don't know what food is. Your idea of food is what comes in a box, tastes great, and has a nice crunch and a flavor. And we're all addicted to those things. And we have to realize is that there's a great book by Eric Schlosser called Fast Food Nation, which determined what happened in the 70s about the agricultural business and how food started to be designed to create addictions inside our bodies so that we would consume more of it, because the
Right.
cost of customer acquiring
Dopamine.
customer is more than it is to get a person to buy more. And that's when the sizes went up and the bags up and people went up. And so here we are today.
Totally. Yeah, that's so on point. And I work at a farm, the Veterans Healing Farm, Hendersonville, and it's amazing. Not only do I create all my own herbal products for the veterans there, but we also grow our own food, or organic, and we have all these different methods, and it tastes completely different. And I really am spoiled in a great way. I can't even eat something if I go out to eat. I'm like, oh, this tastes really weird. Where's the flavor? And they just put all this stuff all over it, like dressing and sauce and salt to try to make it taste good. But if you just have, like you said, like a real peach or, a cucumber or tomato straight off the vine. There's really nothing that can compare to it. And I hope for the vision for our future is that people are, growing even a little small place on your balcony or your porch where you're growing some of your own food in a way that you can have that's not so passed down the train or the truck, and having less of an impact not only on your environment but also on your digestive health too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so all this stuff is interfering with your inner terrain.
Hmm.
And that inner terrain determines how well you digest, absorb, and utilize that food that we described in the digestive process. And any food that is not digest, absorb, and utilize now becomes a potential toxin and a disruptor to your health. And that is a massive issue that we all have to deal with en masse.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so when someone is in this state of disruption, what are some of the things that they can start to like? What would be your top, thing you would recommend for somebody that's having, maybe let's do something that's really common, like a gas and bloating. I think those are probably pretty common. What would be like the top thing that someone can start implementing right now, like today, that they could say, like, okay, I know we talked about earlier about not having a band-aid, but I think sometimes to shift someone out of that state of disruption, you have to have something higher on the therapeutic order that then they can have a little bit of relief. And then we start the healing.
Well, so if people notice I was kind of shuffling around here, I get one of these. It's called a
Yeah.
journal.
Right. Yeah. Journal. I love my journal.
Pen and paper. Very simple. First thing you want to do is start writing down and tracking your behavior. When do you get gas and bloating? When does it occur? Does it occur at a certain time? What was your emotional level? What was your stress level? What was your food level? Like, what was happening? Was it a public event? Were you watching television? Start really paying attention.
Hmm.
The first thing is pay attention to what happens when you eat. How do you feel? What is the overall sensation? And if you do that for 2 weeks straight, guess what? You are going to see the issues that you have. Then stop doing the things that are causing the problem.
Right.
Now,
Simple.
oftentimes people wait until they're severely compromised before they get down there. And that's where you need to get a professional in your life to start
Right.
helping guide you. And then, because most people we're the only species that doesn't know how to naturally choose the food that is, because we've so altered food. So you need guidance, you need help,
Hmm.
take you on a proper diet system. And then you're going to need some accountability in that system,
Right.
because you have to realize that food that we're addicted to today is because much of the food that causes the problems is literally like a drug addiction. We are
Totally.
biochemical addiction to it is real.
Hmm.
So you have to realize that, okay, I'm addicted to the food that's bad and unhealthy for me, because it's like if you're taking a terrible drug like heroin.
Hmm.
Well, everybody knows that heroin isn't good for you, but that doesn't stop people from killing themselves from using it. Well, why? Because the addiction of the heroin, the sensation the heroin gives, supersedes the awareness and loss of one's vitality.
Mm-hmm.
And so if one thinks of the foods that you're addicted to today as a heroin, then you realize, oh, to overcome addiction, I need help. So I need someone to keep me accountable, that will hold me to a standard and help me navigate my addiction to the food of the world. And we're all addicted to food. I'm addicted to it. You're addicted to it. We all
Hmm.
get sugar very young. It was inside our food. We've all get refined foods, all these things, the fat and sugar combination that creates a stronger addiction than heroin, for example, in your brain, or crack cocaine. You know, good luck trying to overcome those without having some guidance, some aids to really get your body so that feeling better is a bigger addiction than feeding the destructive addiction.
Yeah, that's so key and so true. And so many people, I think that when they're in that state of addiction, it's like blinders are on, right? And they really can't see what it would be like to have eating healthy food. And when you make that transition, then the body can have some reactions, right? And so that's why what you're saying, it's really key to have an expert guiding you, because if you're trying to come off of these foods that you've been addicted to, you can have a lot of reactions, like skin reactions, or going into that detox mode, which is kind of my next thing I was going to talk to you about, which is a great segue. So you're in in this state of toxicity, so to speak, and disruption, how key is it that you're doing some type of detoxification to really get that system to get rid of the things that have been affecting the cells and affecting, the DNA and all the digestive process?
Well, the detoxification aspect of the body is partly controlled by lifestyle, partly controlled by your genetics. And so you have to realize that some people detox very easily, some people detox very slowly and more difficult. So you're going to have to regulate and mitigate based on what God gave. And I think a lot of people don't address that. Usually the first 21 days, the first 3 weeks of dietary intervention, let's call it,
Mm-hmm.
they're not easy. The convenience and lifestyle habits that you've developed around that diet need to be broken.
Mm-hmm.
The addictions need to be broken. And oftentimes, in severe cases of disruption, you start detoxing, and the detoxing is not fun. You have you can get breakouts, you can get headaches,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you can have either constipation or you can get diarrhea. You
Yeah.
might, sometimes it's very extreme, and people say, oh, this new program is worse than the old one. No, you're going through what's called, quote unquote, a healing crisis.
That's right.
And so when engaging in this, you want to give yourself a little bit of runway to get some momentum. Usually you'll get some
Mm,
positive momentum within 3 weeks.
yeah.
But that first 3 weeks, don't plan on this is going to be a party or fun.
Right. Going on vacation.
Yeah. So usually what'll happen is you go through that phase, and then oftentimes people will lose a little bit of weight or start to look better or have a little bit more energy or sleep better or whatever. They'll start to see some benefits in that time.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
going to vary from person. That's your key out of the disease state, the
Mhm.
dis-ease state, is that you need to be able to find something where feeling better is better than something tasting good.
Mm-hmm. Right. So
And
you can change
that's the
that
key.
neurotransmitter
You really got
connection.
to get there. And if you don't get there, you will never come back from it. And that sounds very dire, but you're just not going to. And you have to go through this phase. You
Right.
have to flip the switch in your mind and go forward with it. And that's where coaching is really, really helpful, that you have someone to lean on those trying days when the addiction is overpowering your good intentions.
Right. Yeah. And I think what you mentioned too earlier about sugar, I mean, I think that that's like what I hear the most, that people have the hardest part. And that really stems a lot from childhood. And it, is given as a reward system. And I've see it doing so much damage now with our children. It's like, oh, you want to do this? Here, let me give you this sugar treat. Or you didn't do that. Let me give you the sugar, And so that stems a really bad plate for us to have, into adulthood, to have a sugar addiction that's in every cell of our body, like you said, and we take it out and our body just goes into panic mode because it's been the reward. And they're like, well, what do I do for my reward now? And so you have to have something, I tell patients, find something that you can substitute in a new reward system that's going to be so helpful for you. Like, whatever that is, some kind, like maybe you're going to, I don't know, exercise or whatever it is that you find that gives you that reward, that satisfaction in some level.
Yeah.
Hmm. What do you think about parasites? I know you have a great parasite product, and I just want to kind of like talk about parasites with you a little bit, because patients always ask me like, so do I need to do a parasite cleanse? Does everybody have parasites? Should I do something? Should I do it once a year? Like, how do I, and testing, I think, is a great, kind of segue into that. But what are your thoughts about parasites in general?
Well, I almost lost my eye to a parasite. So it wasn't something that was
Wow.
on my radar until I ran into it. And I'll refer people to a book called Parasite Rex,
Mm,
which is one of the most frightening books you can ever read. And you have to realize that parasites have caused the death, I think, of more humans than wars. Doing
wow.
all the
That's a
wars,
that's a huge
it's a
statistic.
lot. And
Yeah.
so these are little critters who are phenomenally adaptive, and it's a fascinating book. These little animals that go through these massive changes, they enter into other bodies, and then they mutate into something else,
Right.
and then that
Horror
will
movie.
discover the function of that particular brain. Like there's one parasite that gets into rats that gets the rats to run out into the open where the birds will get them, and then the birds eat them, and then they get in the bird, and then they get into the crap that the bird takes out, and then another species gets that, and then it gets into that, and in each stage they mutate to go through that. Like it's
Mind
really
blowing.
wild. It's
Yeah.
really wild. And I had a parasite that contracted when I was in Bali, Indonesia, that ended up going up and was actually eating on my eye structure, and I almost lost one of my eyes because of it, which
Wow.
turned me to investigate the role of parasites. And
Yeah.
so I got into it and started looking at elements that, Chinese medicine and Indian medicine have always addressed parasites. And
Right.
a lot of the reason why we see things like cloves put into ham, or
Mm-hmm.
wasabi and ginger in raw seafood, like in sushi, was to alleviate parasites. So I will say this: the more raw food that you eat,
Mm-hmm.
the more meat that you eat, or shellfish and seafood goes into that, the more likelihood that you could contract parasites.
Right. Or travel too, right? More international travel you're
Correct.
doing. Yeah.
Correct. So those are the elements that will instill parasites into the body or give them likelihood. There are some interesting parasitical tests that you can take, and I think a practitioner that's going to, so if you have strange cravings, grinding of the teeth at night, a lot of those are parasites. If you have skin conditions, unusual skin conditions, particularly with acne or weird things coming out on your skin, oftentimes that's usually related to it.
Yeah.
Sometimes elimination issues can be parasitical. Underweight
Right.
or overweight can be
Right.
caused by parasites, causing either
Yeah.
cravings for sugarings or eating all the calories from your food.
Right. Are you
So,
feeding the worm, or is the worm feeding you?
yeah, exactly. So I think that's really interesting to observe and see. And it's funny because I started using parasite cleansers after that time, and they can be very beneficial.
Yeah, I think, that I love that. And it's so true that, they're all around us. They're just, they're just part of our environment. And I think we need to think about them in our system. And especially, I do a lot of travel. Well, I haven't been doing as much recently, but I'll be starting again. And I always take parasite herbs with me, anti-parasite herbs, so that I can help my body to process, because I'm eating things that I'm not as used to. I eat a very wide variety of foods, but I don't eat a lot of international foods. Like, I've had raw horse, like all kinds of things that I want my body to be able to process and not have, like you said, like, wow, it's crazy story having a parasite in your eye. I'm glad that it didn't, that you lose your vision.
Yeah, very close to it. So.
Yeah. So when you're in this state of you're starting to recognize that you have some dysfunction, you worked with a practitioner. Let's talk about probiotics for a minute, because there's so many different strains, different types of probiotics. What's the difference between like a prebiotic and a probiotic? How do you even know like what probiotic that you should be beneficial for you?
Yeah, great question. So some of the gold standards are like GI maps or Viome tests that can determine what types of good, bad, and bad or opportunist bacteria that you have. And
Right.
this composes what you call your microbiome, which is anywhere from 500 strain, 200 to 500. Sometimes some people, they say even 1,000. They just recently found some quote unquote uncivilized tribes in South America that had over 250 types of bacteria that they never seen before,
Wow.
which are probably concordant with the plants and animals that they eat in that area, which may have been eradicated by modern lifestyles.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what's interesting is these little organisms manufacture a variety of enzymes and chemicals and nutrients. So we have PhDs in microbiome that actually run all sorts of tests with bacteria to determine what they do, what they feed on. So the first question is, there's probiotics and prebiotics. Prebiotics essentially is the food that bacteria eat. That's
Right.
so what they need. And bacteria in your intestines will actually work in conjunction with your nervous system through the production of neurochemicals to make you be addicted to foods and will also, and that could be addicted to good foods and that could be addicted to bad foods because they're determining what they need to eat.
Right. And they're
So I always say,
repopulating
hey,
with more of them.
it's not you that's running off to the 7-Eleven at 1 o'clock for the ice cream ding dong and the bag of chips and the
Ding
licorice.
dongs.
It's the bad guys who are running neurochemicals saying, feed me.
Right, exactly.
So that's step one. Step
Mhm.
two, I think it's very interesting. Harvard just came out with a paper that demonstrated that almost everyone is suffering from some form of leaky gut. That is a permeability in the intestinal wall that's allowing undigested proteins to go into the digestive system, which
Yep.
causes inflammation and autoimmune responses. And
Mm.
left unchecked was a big problem. So I think bacteria that repair the lining and right. So we have a product called called it's Gut Guardian. We're actually just changing the name. We're just changing the name of that. So I'll get to that later on. But basically, there are substances, prebiotic supplements that these different types of bacteria will actually consume, and that will allow them to repair that tissue. There are bacteria that are strong for immune system. Like we produce a bacteria called L. plantarum, which we enhance through a very intense process to make it into a super bacteria. We threw it in a chemical soup. I ran a sine wave through it. The remainder ones we grew on special mediums. And with that, it's got a patent on its capabilities. We're looking at actually developing super bacteria to deal with all the super bugs and super problems that we're dealing with today.
That would be great.
Yeah, well, so that's what we're churning out. Then there are other
Nice.
probiotics that are involved in the production of neurochemicals, particularly serotonin being one of the most dominant ones. And so we have different probiotics that are involved in that. So again, you're going to have to deal with your practitioner to determine what's your gut map. How does this relate to your diet? And let's pick a diet that's going to support the good guys and starve out the bad guys.
Exactly.
And then and that means you're probably going to have to go on an elimination diet because you might
Right.
be eating the bad guys, particularly things like Candida is a great example. Got
Yeah.
to get off the gluten, got to get off the sugars, got to get off all those things to starve those guys out while you're repopulating the good guys so that you can get those in check. And I've done that over and over and over with people. So there is no one size fits all probiotics, or I saw
Right.
probiotics in my yogurt. Probiotics became a trend.
Yeah.
When you have a trend, you get what's called Me Too movements. And the Me Too movement is like, oh, we've got probiotics. And people think, oh, well, I've got 24 probiotics in this. That's better than 18 in this one. No, you need the right probiotic for you and your diet that gives you the results that you want. And any company that you purchase from should back up their product with 100% money back guarantee. And why is
Right.
that? Well, that way, you know that if you try it and it's not the right probiotic for you, you don't risk any of your money and you give it back. And that's what we do. And usually we can find the probiotic that's right for that particular person.
Yeah, and that's really important because you don't want to be taking something that's not right for you. And like you said before, everybody's individual. So if you're taking something, I always tell patients, if you're taking something that's not working, tell me, because we need to shift it so
Yes.
that you're seeing results. Like, I'll have patients come in with like 20 bottles of supplements. I'm like, are any of these working for you?
They're like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. You can't tell. Yeah. So thanks, Wade. That was a great explanation about bacteria. And what about the enzymes? How did those play a role in the function of the gut health in combination with bacteria?
Yeah, so the godfather of enzymatic research was a fellow by the name of Dr. Edward Howe, who studied a variety of different species fed on an enzymatically deficient diet. And by third generation, they lost the ability to procreate. They had strange sociological behaviors and a massive amount of genetic-based diseases. And back in the 40s and 50s, he predicted the same thing would happen from modern food production, which we talked about earlier. And so here we are 3 generations in, and that's exactly what's happened. You see genetic diseases rising exponentially. That makes no sense from a genetic standpoint that there is that much mutation within a generation or two. We are seeing, turn on YouTube. You're going to see lots of strange sociological behavior, not to mention your local neighborhood. And then finally, look at procreation clinics and how so many people are struggling to replicate. And enzymes are what separates plants, stones, plants, and people.
Right.
Stones don't have enzymatic reactions, plants do, people have a lot. And basically, it's your metabolic bank account. It's how you are able to do chemical reactions in the body, how many, how strong, how frequent, and the totality of it. And so Dr. Howell created what he called the enzyme bank account. Now, every species on the planet eats its food in a raw state. And when you eat, the difference between the living and the dead is enzymatic reactions. And so the thing is humans in their infinite wisdom figured out how to cook food. Now, cooking food has a lot of advantages from a caloric standpoint and probably contributed to the dominance of the species as well as the growth of brains and things like that.
Right.
Because we had a surplus of calories, and there's a lot of different theories behind that. But I think it's safe to say that the ability to store, transport food has enhanced humans' adaptability. We're the most adaptable species on the planet next to bacteria.
Right.
And I would say we're both at the end of the dominant scales. If you look at bacteria kind of proliferate everywhere, and humans do as well. And eventually we get eaten by the bacteria. So maybe they're still winning.
Right. Who's winning that game?
Who's winning that game? Maybe we're just meat suits for the bacteria to go around.
I think that's possible. Yeah, that's exactly what happens.
It's a very symbiotic relationship. So it's hard to tell where I begin and the bugs start, or vice versa. But when it comes to enzymes, herbivore plants or herbivore animals will eat very sprouts and things like that have a lot of enzyme rich. And a carnivore, like a tiger, will take down a zebra. It'll eat the entrails or the enzymes and highest concentration of enzymes and probiotics before it eats the carcass.
Right.
A bear will eat a raw salmon and it'll eat raw berries. It's an omnivore. But when we cook food, we destroy the enzymes inside that's present in that. And so what we're getting, the definition that we've had of food, which was generated many years ago, didn't include the enzyme content or the bacterial content that was associated with that food. In those omissions, and I would say it's not by any grand conspiracy, it's just they've never really thought about it, that those omissions, those are concordant with the breakdown, digestion, absorption, and utilization of that food. And because of cooking, processing, preservatives, dyes, all these things, which disrupt enzymatic activity, not to mention the thousands and thousands of chemicals that are produced, we have varying degrees of enzymatic deficiency across the human spectrum, which leads to all of these other conditions that were replicated in every species that Howell tested. And so what he did determine is that the length of any organism was determined by its enzymatic bank account. And so it makes sense that if you want to live long and live strong, supplementing your diet with high quality enzymes will enhance digestion and may potentially lead to a longer life, or certainly a more robust one. And certainly it was replicated in all the other species. And of course, that's extrapolation. And I choose to err on that side of caution. I run an enzyme company. It helped transform my own health and tens of thousands of people that I've been able to work with. So, but I will say that I am biased in that decision. Some people would say, well, Wade, your body manufactures enzymes. Well, of course it does.
If it's running 100% optimally, maybe.
But how does it do that?
Right.
It does that by converting smooth muscle tissue and striated muscle tissue and converts those into the enzymes to digest its food. And there has a metabolic cost. So the question is, what would it be like? Would you like to have a big bank account of money or a small bank account? Well, I believe that enzymes are like having a bank account. And if you make regular deposits in it, it pays dividends down the road.
Right. So depositing it into the correct account, right? So like you mentioned earlier too, the individualized aspect of the person and what they need. And there are lots of different enzymes for different types of functions. And particularly when it comes to I think people that have a problem with gluten or people that have a problem with dairy, there's specific enzymes. And like you mentioned too, like having, vegetarian, having that omnivore diet, it's specific things in your body. So checking with a practitioner, making sure you're getting that enzyme that's right for you, especially for the specific diet that you have, is really key.
Yes.
And then one thing I wanted to talk about too is that, when you were talking about the enzymes, it's so important, I think, to recognize that our body does so many different, like you mentioned, enzymatic reactions that aren't just about the gut. So yeah, it's like so many, and so many are connected to the epigenetics and how our body, has its mood, how it sleeps, how it has sex. Like everything is connected to an enzyme. And if we're taking enzymes, that can be such a powerhouse for our whole body, not just the digestive system.
Well, one thing that we do know from long-term studies on people who live the longest is they tend to eat less. That's the one concordant things. And the second thing is they tend to have strong social bonds.
Mm.
And so if you think about that for a second, well, why would eating less let you live longer? And I believe that the eating of too many calories or causing too much enzymes to break down the food that you're eating
Hmm.
leads to shorter lifespans.
Right.
And that's why reduction of food consumption seems to lead to longevity. The other thing is when you're talking about the sociological behaviors, I do believe that many of the social capabilities can maybe also tied to enzymatic action. And so our ability to connect with other people and be social and these type of things are also concordant with living a long time. We looked at those animals that didn't have enzymes. They started to elicit antisocial behaviors, not normal to that particular species. And so if we can extrapolate that onto humans, obviously you couldn't just do that with humans because of the ethics of all that sort of stuff.
Would have been a
Um,
good quarantine study, though.
indeed, indeed. And I think, one day it will be proven that enzymes are as important and as essential as the various vitamins and minerals that we well know lead to a healthier life.
I think, yeah, I totally agree with that. They're so key. And you're talking a little bit earlier about that gut brain connection and how important are the enzymes to that gut brain connection, and what is the gut brain connection? We kind of like sprinkled about it a little bit.
Well, the gut brain connection means that bacteria work in a symbiotic relationship with our nervous system, and that they produce a variety of their own enzymes and chemical agents, things like antioxidants, for example. We
Mhm.
measure this stuff in the lab all the time. We have PhDs in Europe who we run tests. For example, if you feed vitamins to your bacteria, they produce more antioxidants and grow better. If you subject them to EMF waves, they won't grow as well.
Mhm.
If you put different types of prebiotics, they will grow. And so we know that external influence affects that. But now, research, particularly in psychological assessment, is we're starting to see that neurochemical imbalances may actually be traced to the gut bacteria, and that
Mhm.
maybe you don't possess the bacteria that produces the serotonin, or you don't have the elements that assist in that. And so it's a combination of the workers and the elements, bacteria being the workers, enzymes and bacteria, what do the work in the body,
Right.
and the materials that you're feeding, which is the dietary choices that you make, can determine whether you can produce in these various chemicals. And a lot of your neurochemicals, how your brain, how you perceive the world, are directly correlated to this component. And
Mm.
so when we see people adding these into the diet that oftentimes struggle with low mood and the other psychiatric conditions that are so pervasive in modern society today,
Mhm.
they start to see benefits both within that, and it becomes easier to eliminate the things that are feeding the bad guys. And then once again, because the bad guys will produce neurotoxins. And so to think of it in really layman's terms, bad guys make you do bad things and feel bad.
Mm.
Good guys make you do good things and make you feel good. So if you find yourself not able to adhere to a dietary regimen, no matter what you do, there's a high likelihood that you have an imbalance of these good and bad bacteria. And with some GI maps, a little bit
Mhm.
of testing, a little bit of dietary insight, looking at your genetics and epigenetics, you can select a diet that's going to support the good guys, eliminate the bad guys, and you can add some bacteria into your intestines to bolster that up. And more often than not, the results are very positive.
Yeah, and you can use the wonderful food journal that you were talking about earlier. That's such a great way to really see how your body's doing, what's working, what's not working, and to have like it's an insight, right? We're always looking what's for insight, what's happening on the inside of our body. And that can be such a simple tool to see what we're doing is working and how we're improving. Because, our memories are short when it comes to illness sometimes, like, oh, I forgot that I felt so crappy last week.
Totally.
Right. And so the journal can really help with that. All the time have to tell patients, hey, let's go back and look at how you were doing a year ago. Look how much you've improved today.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, great. Wade, it's been so fun to have you on the show today. One last kind of question as we're wrapping up. If you had an unlimited budget right now, what would you do to make the biggest impact on the planet?
Well, funny you should say that. There was a study by the World Health Organization, what I would say an honorable member of the World Health Organization, and those are few and far between, years ago, about looking at how they summed up the 20 biggest things that could be done to help the world. People are looking at climate change and economics and political
Hmm.
things and food. And there's the one thing that would be concurrent to help the entire world was increase the nutritional content. So for about 2 cents a day, because if a pregnant woman is nutritionally deficient and has a child, the IQ impact on that child is significant. And people don't want to talk about this.
Right.
That child will grow up as an adult with cognitive debilities for the rest of their life. And with the addition of quality nutrition across the world, it would have this impact. Number one, people would make better decisions. So better on population, also higher possibilities for contribution to society, lower crime rates, lower death rates, increased in prosperity. And when you increase prosperity to about $5,000 a person globally, they start to take care of the environment. And
Mm.
so the number one thing to address the biggest issues that we face today, whether it's food or climate change, cognitive issue, crime, economic disparity, is actually good nutrition, and it's very effective. And so hopefully one day I can envision bringing vitamins and minerals and health food to virtually every person on the planet.
Wow. Oh, I love that. That's great. And it's so, so important and so easy. That's what I love asking that question, because there's things that people want to do that are so easy to start to implement, and I think over the past year and a half, we've really seen how we can make a difference when we really, stop and listen to what the planet really needs and the people need.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Wade. It's been such a joy to have you on the show, and I can't wait to share it with the world.
Thank you so much.